Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is founder and chair of Educated We Stand, Jennifer Jenkins. Jennifer, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me again.
In his first few weeks of his second term, President Donald Trump has signed a flurry of actions. And now, reportedly, his sights are set on the Department of Education. He could sign an executive order to shut down the agency imminently within a few days. This is a department that was founded in 1979 by Jimmy Carter. I'm curious, what is your reaction to the news?
It's confusing, it's frustrating, it's causing fear and chaos amongst families, not only here in the state of Florida, but all across the nation. I'm baffled actually by this decision. I'm not surprised. This is something obviously Trump has said during his campaign and a promise he was going to make to the people who voted for him. But poll after poll says this is one of the most unpopular ideas with the American people as a whole. And when you go back in history, in the 1990s, the Republican Party lost the House majority because of this very issue. And they started to change their stance as we went into the 2000s and actually advocated for expanding the Department of Education. So it's confusing to me, but there is a little hope in my heart that he's not going to go through with it because ultimately they know it's not popular with the American people.
I want to read a quote from the president on the campaign trail about the Department of Education. He said this, quote, "We will drain the government education swamp and stop the abuse of your taxpayer dollars to indoctrinate America's youth with all sorts of things that you don't want to have our youth hearing." So what I'm hearing from this quote are there's two things, and there's two things that his supporters and people who support this agree with. One, that he wants to cut government excess, especially in the Department of Education, and make it more efficient. And two, he wants to give parents more rights when it comes to their child's education. What do you think of those two arguments?
I'm not shocked. Time after time, things that come out of Trump's mouth are all lies. Are there things that can be improved? Absolutely. No educator in their right mind wouldn't agree with that. But when you're talking about making cuts, you're making cuts to our most vulnerable children across the United States. And when you talk about giving back power to parents and focusing on local control, is really just a facade, because the reality is this is just an attack on federal oversight and civil rights protections, which is ensuring our children have access to a fair education. We're going to reduce the ability to enforce critical laws like Title IX, which protect against gender discrimination, and IDEA, which guarantees education access for our students with disabilities. So, these statements are not only lies, but they're very, very dangerous. We're going to roll back decades of progress, and our most vulnerable students are going to be unprotected.
You're scared by this. You think that this is a chaotic move. You're confused. The Department of Education, as I said at the top, was created by President Jimmy Carter in 1979. What exactly does the Department of Education do, and what would happen if it was dismantled?
The Department of Education only provides about 10% of the funding to our local school districts. So that's a really important message for voters to understand, because often we're getting, again, slapped in the face with these lies that it needs to go back to the states. The reality is the majority of the control, the majority of the money does come from your state. The dangerous part, again, is the money that comes from the federal government is to support our most vulnerable students, our students, most especially in rural communities. And I think that this is something that Republican officials are going to have a really difficult time with. They're going to have to face a tough choice if Trump does go through and try to strategically dismantle or to abolish the Department of Education. Those Republican officials in rural states are going to have to explain to constituents that they're gutting federal funding which supports their struggling schools. Low-income families, students with disabilities, kids who are relying on meals to make it through the day. These communities are going to have much larger class sizes, fewer early education and after-school programs. There's going to be cuts to job training programs and less access to financial aid for them to access college, which the majority of our students who access Pell Grants are coming from those rural communities.
It's really interesting because when you look back at President George W. Bush's speeches and his actions around education, he struck a much different tone in the Republican Party. He started the No Child Left Behind initiative. He thought that children who lived in more impoverished communities were at a disadvantage, and he wanted to equal the playing field. That still is, or that those actions are still looked as controversial. But what do you think? Why do you think there has been this change, especially from the Republican Party, when it comes to education in this country?
I can't really explain it. It's not based on polling. It's not based on data. I think it is fear mongering and just rhetoric. I believe that this is taxpayer funded discrimination at its best. We are taking public dollars and putting them into private hands. We are, again, selling a lie to the American people when we tell them that school choice offers more opportunity to their kids, when the reality is those kids who need that opportunity and choice the most are still being shut out from those schools. And so I think it's important for us to focus on the fact that this is about dismantling opportunity, not just the Department of Education, and we can't let that happen.
Talk about that a little bit more, because this executive order would essentially turn over the responsibilities of the Department of Education to the states. So how do you think this would impact, or at all, different areas in different states disproportionately?
I mean, I can use Florida as an example. We are a warning for the rest of the country, right? Florida has done everything in its power to come across as being fully in control of their education system. And an important history about Florida is that it's been in a Republican control for over 20 years, a House majority, a Senate majority, and the governor's mansion. And we lead now in our overcrowded classrooms. We are number one in the nation for overcrowded classrooms. We're number one in the nation for book bans, and we rank dead last in teacher pay. And just this year, when they expanded our voucher program, we spent over billion with a B, in taxpayer money to expand voucher programs and put money into unregulated private schools. We have schools that have less rules, less oversight, that aren't even impacted by the laws that, Ron DeSantis likes to brag about, the anti-woke laws. And we give them the right to choose their students. We're currently telling kids that slavery had benefits, and our SAT scores drop year after year after year. So again, this isn't about giving the control back to the states. We have to understand the dangers of that. The federal government ensures civil rights protections for our students, and they step in when things are wrong. And I unfortunately believe in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see it here in the state of Florida, more and more discrimination, more and more segregation of communities, and our most vulnerable students are going to continuously be left behind.
When you're thinking about this state that's most aligned with where President Trump is right now on education, it certainly seems that Florida is the state with Governor Ron DeSantis' actions regarding education. So what are the conversations like surrounding education in the state of Florida? Because the stats you're just rattling off, no parent wants to hear SAT scores are dropping, the classes are oversized, we're not an attractive state for teachers. So what are those conversations looking like?
Again, it's difficult to break through the lies and the noise and the rhetoric. Unfortunately, the leaders in our state are continuously pushing misinformation to the voters, such as we're number one in education, when the reality is what they're quoting is something that is saying that we're the most affordable private public colleges in the nation. They're ignoring the data that our kids are failing in math, they're failing in reading. We had significant gains after COVID, and now we're starting to see those diminish quickly. So I think they're kind of scraping to hold on to what they perceive as this control and this majority support from the voters in the state of Florida. I think we're going to see some interesting choices made in this legislative session here. There's been a couple of bills that have been put on the table that have caused a lot of controversy. Many of them, of course, expanding public dollars to private institutions, and it's not going well with the public perception.
He would need, and by he I mean President Donald Trump, would need congressional approval to dismantle the Department of Education. So do you think that this executive order is symbolic?
Yeah, it's difficult to understand the decisions that Trump makes and why he makes them. Sometimes there's decisions of a madman, and I don't know if it's a way for him to prove that he has this authority to do things that he knows he doesn't have. But you're absolutely right. Congress holds the power to abolish the Department of Education, not the president. They would need a 60% support, and I just don't see that happening. But what concerns me is the extent that he would push Linda McMahon to do within her right and her capacity as Secretary of Education without the approval of Congress.
I am curious, you're someone who works in this space. You're in Florida, which is really at the forefront of this change in education that we're seeing. What do you think is missing from the national conversation when it comes to the potential that President Trump could sign an executive order shuttering the agency?
I think the most important thing that we are missing in this conversation is this isn't just a difference of belief systems and ideologies. If this was to go through, the most vulnerable students and families, and again, our rural states, are going to be hit so significantly. And this is the future of our children. This is the future of our country's security, its economy. It's not something that you can just change. Say we have a different president in 4 years. You can't just build back a department overnight. It will be catastrophic. And honestly, it will change the next couple of decades of the future of the United States of America.
And President Trump, other Republicans have said they don't want young kids learning about sexual orientation. They don't want young kids learning about things like critical race theory. That's their argument. When it comes to what we're seeing now with President Trump, with his vision of the Department of Education, or lack thereof, his vision for education in this country, what do you think that looks like? What do you think education will look like in 4 years of Trump?
I think it's going to look just like Florida, where we have revisionist history, whitewashed history, an injection of extreme right wing ideology in our schools. There are superintendents in states that legitimately bought Trump Bibles and mailed them out to all of their institutions. So, the very thing that they claim that they are trying to fight against, the indoctrination of our children, that's exactly what they are doing, and it is very, very dangerous.
And Jennifer, what specifically are you looking out for next? Because there was reporting last week that said President Trump could sign this executive order imminently. So between now and then, what are you looking out for?
I just want people to pay attention to the rest of the appointments and the people who are working in the Department of Education. As scary as Linda McMahon is as the Secretary of Education, quite frankly, she's one of the least terrible choices that were on the table. And so there's a little bit of a sigh of relief there. But really, the ones who are making the decisions and advising her, those are the people we need to pay attention to. We need to pay attention to the policies that they are suggesting for her to put in place, and the cuts, quite frankly. I mean, before she was even appointed, there was already a proposal of $900 million cut from the Department of Education. And again, that is significant. That is money that goes to improving reading and math scores that they claim that they care about, offering meals to children in hungry families. So again, I'm just going to keep my eye out for any whispers of cuts and extreme placements.
Well, Jennifer, I appreciate our conversations per usual. Thank you so much for your insight. You are welcome back anytime.
Thanks for having me.